All right, the recording is started, and this is the August 6, 2019 Crossplane community meeting. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time focusing on recently is figuring out an updated roadmap of epics and features that we want to address in this project over the next few milestones. So the current milestone is 0.3. And we have a pretty much a complete plan figured out with the epics opened and features associated with those epics, and the roadmap is updated in a pull request as well. So let's take a quick look at that just to get all on the same page. So here is the roadmap, which Phil has been driving. So let's take a look at the roadmap specifically. And we have the previous milestones in there first, and then we have the 0.3 milestones. Phil, do you want to briefly talk through this update of the roadmap that you're driving?
Sure. So if you scroll back up, so I basically pruned 0.2 and then added a bunch of stuff that we did into 0.2 that wasn't captured there. So that's now accurately reflecting the workload scheduling, the database, the cache, and the bucket support with both Postgres and MySQL. The reconciliation requeue pattern, some UX enhancements, and then some engineering fixes for consistent logging and so forth. So that provided us a really solid foundation for 0.3. And so if we scroll down to 0.3, the primary focus here is enabling partners to build infrastructure stacks. So as many of you have seen at KubeCon, we demoed deploying the GitLab stack to multiple clouds, to both GCP and AWS. And so we're moving then to provide a set of resource class enhancements around having default classes in an environment that increases the portability of the claims, because you don't have to specify the class reference there. And so that's just an optional choice that you have to make your claims more portable. And then also allowing those resource classes to have stronger open API validation on each of the respective CRDs. So that's in flight right now, and also supporting annotations for that, and install time annotations kind of coming in the next section. So the big thrust of the 0.3 release is moving these infrastructure stacks out of tree, so that basically they can be maintained more independently, and that it's easier for anybody to come and say, oh, I want to create an infrastructure stack for a cloud provider, that you don't currently support, whether it be like, DigitalOcean or Tencent or Alibaba Cloud or things like that. And we're really focused on providing single region secure connectivity between the K's target cluster and those cloud services that we provision all from within Kubernetes. So there's a set of functionality in here around enhancements to the stacks manager, which is basically a renamed extension manager, adding in the notion of apps versus infrastructure stacks, namespace isolation and annotation support for doing the annotation overlay at install time, moving the infrastructure stacks into separate repos for the big three there, and then upgrading to KubeBuilder 2 as part of that. So we have a super solid foundation for all of the infrastructure stacks going forward, and just getting that made more current and getting off of our custom fork control runtime. And so that'll all be completely standard now. And then actually I'm going into each individual infrastructure stack and providing that single region secure connectivity between the respective managed Kubernetes providers, and then the cloud services that provide database, cache, and buckets in those clouds. And then providing kind of the initial developer experience with the stack CLI tooling. That might be in the form of the kubectl plugin, but effectively providing like an init scaffolding type of experience, as well as being able to then build and push that to the registry. And then wrapping up with docs and examples. So getting these infrastructure stacks split out of tree is really great, but we want to make it super easy for people to enable a couple key scenarios. So one is just, hey, there's an existing infrastructure stack like GCP or AWS, And then I want to add an additional cloud service to that. So, tell me what I need to do to accomplish that. And then the other one is, hey, I want to, copy one of the infrastructure stacks or create one from scratch. Guide me through that process. And so that's really what 610 is all about. We're going to be using a portable WordPress app stack to basically both demonstrate, but also to validate the end-to-end functionality. And so that's going to be using the default resource classes so that you can take that WordPress app stack and deploy it into either the GCP infrastructure stack or the AWS infrastructure stack or Azure, and it'll work in all of those environments. And then we're going to be refreshing the 0.3 docs to reflect all the enhancements from above, which is a ton of work. So super excited about that, but also to provide kind of a more seamless onboarding experience and just making it easier to get started as a user, as a contributor. And then lastly, providing some examples for DevOps pipelines like Jenkins and GitLab, and then maybe a GitOps flow using both GCP and AWS stacks and probably Azure as well.
Awesome, Phil. Thank you for sharing the what we've converged on for a near-term roadmap in 0.3, and there's also some of the items that we see in the future as well as we kind of refine some of the upcoming milestones 0.4 and 0.5. Bless you, Daniel. We will keep this roadmap up to date along with that as well. I am definitely excited about the docs and examples getting updated, taking a complete pass through that to match our newer, refined and, more mature user experience and making sure that everything's accurate, easy to follow, etc. I'm definitely looking forward to that. I believe that the majority of our documentation is still from the night before our first release. So I'm shocked that it's remained to this day here. And so any improvements we can make to that will be a great win for the community and new members that are trying to understand what Crossplane is all about and have a good experience starting with it.
Awesome.
All right. So in addition to the roadmap, we, as I mentioned, we opened a set of epics that basically one-to-one match what we just went over in the roadmap. So we are now using an epic label here that captures higher level themes, really large scale issues or features and desires for the project. So they can all be found in the epic label now. And if you drill down into, any of these particular epics, you will see here beyond, explaining what the epic is about and how we would validate it and what we're trying to accomplish with the epic. We also have the composite, the set of features and issues that make up that epic linked all here as well. So you can follow along with the high level theme and the set of stories, issues, features, tasks, etc. that we need to execute on in order to deliver on the high-level epic theme. Okay, and trying to wrap this up here. So in addition to the roadmap and the epics that we've opened here, we took a pass and updated the 0.3 milestone as well. So the 0.3 milestone now has all of the epics and features that we have identified as part of the 0.3 milestone in the roadmap, and they're all captured here. We have moved out any of the older issues or features that are no longer in scope for the milestone. So the milestone should be completely up to date now, as well as the project board as well, kind of mapping, these phase or state that each issue is in. So I believe this is up to date with everything that I know is in progress or in review, and then the to-do column as well. So the number of issues in the milestone increased recently because, we're with tracking the epics and then opening up issues for each of the subtasks or features that make up that epic. Those are all included in the milestone. So the number of issues did increase. But we are targeting, beginning of September timeframe. So around a month or so from now, give or take, to release 0.3, and we have pretty much all contributors that are assigned and executing on all of these issues. So we are making rapid progress through those, and we will keep an eye on the progress and the burn down as we go through the rest of the milestone timeframe through the month of August. But it looks like this plan is pretty well fleshed out with the milestone, the roadmap, the project board, etc. So we are pretty up to date on what we're hoping to do in the remaining time for the 0.3 milestone. All right, so that's all of the milestone roadmap sort of stuff that's, talking about what we're going to be working on. Thanks, Phil, for going through that whole roadmap update there. And just a reminder to comment or provide feedback on the pull request with the updated roadmap. So in terms of community topics here, I wanted to give a particular shout out to Mark Fisher. That's his GitHub account. We'll never know what his real name is, but that's his GitHub alias at least. So yeah, Mark provided a fix recently that was a great example of user running into an issue with their usage of Crossplane and it not meeting a particular scenario that we hadn't considered with our first implementation. And then what I really liked about Mark's fix was that it was this very simple fix, but so it was a one-line fix, and he added 54 line of unit testing to validate it and verify it. So I'm really happy with Mark's effort here to find the issue from using Crossplane in his own scenarios, finding the root cause of it, fixing it, and then providing adequate testing to verify and prevent from future regressions in the future. So thank you very much, Mark Fisher. All right, the next topic I wanted to talk about is that I don't remember if we had talked about this very broadly, but it's definitely worth bringing up, is that in terms of areas of the Crossplane project and the way that particular contributors are organizing, we've decided to, at least at an early phase, adopt a special interest group type of organization. You see this in the Kubernetes upstream project. That's where I am most familiar with it. You have a SIG, special interest group for storage and for the cloud providers and the API and documentation, all sorts of SIG groups there. Those all have very explicit charters and they have governance around how they operate. We're not at that phase yet where we don't have, charters and governance, et cetera, around the special interest groups, but we do have a high level sense of what is their purpose, what are they focusing on, and how contributors organize in them to focus and deliver on a shared set of functionality. So the two special interest groups that we have so far are for services and stacks is what we're calling them. So with the services special interest group, that'll be the set of contributors that are focusing on converging on the Kubernetes API for a consistent, normalized, universal way of managing infrastructure. And that involves, modeling and writing controllers, CRDs, APIs, et cetera, for all these different platform services and infrastructure, cloud providers, all that sort of stuff. And then also creating a layer of abstractions and portability across those various services for workloads to be able to become portable and deploy to any particular cloud. We have a link here in the meeting agenda for the YouTube list. We have on the Crossplane YouTube channel, we have a set of playlists now, and we have 2 new playlists added, one for the services SIG and also one for the other special interest group, the stack SIG. So if, important meetings or design discussions, et cetera, we are in the habit now of recording those, and we'll post them to the YouTube channel so that anyone who missed out on participating in those discussions can catch up with them by watching the recording.
And just a note on that, Jared. So we're also going to be posting a larger set of videos that are just more impromptu to the Crossplane Slack. And so it does take about 20 to 30 minutes to produce one of the videos for YouTube. And so, also kind of tune into the Crossplane Slacks and looks for some of the replays there. We're using Zoom, and that'll also have audio transcription on them as well. So,
Phil, did you get a chance to check out the quality of the audio transcription?
Yeah, I was just looking at it. I mean, it's not 100%, but it's pretty good, and it has a search, and then it'll index you into that portion of the video. So,
oh, that is fantastic functionality to be able to jump around. Like, if you remember, when were we talking about portability or whatever? And then you can search for the keyword portability, and then it'll go to various times in the video where we're talking about. Oh, that is amazing.
Yeah,
I love that. Wow. So it didn't turn up to be like a horrible, poorly transcribed mess of words. It was actually fairly high fidelity to like a real conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's 80%. So treat it with a grain of salt and just let your pattern matching kind of do its work and suspend disbelief and all that. But yeah, it's readable.
Awesome. Well, it's better than I set my bar low and I am pleasantly surprised. So that's a good way to approach life, by the way. Set your bar low. Okay. So we have a couple of pull requests that are open as well. The first one we have in the list here, Muvafiq is driving. He is stuck in traffic right now, so I guess he's doing a different type of driving right now. But this pull request here is the goal here is the current Crossplane repo is built on the KubeBuilder v1 and controller runtime version 1 patterns. And so we want to update and get modernized because the v1 is pretty much deprecated. So we want to be on the latest controller runtime and pick up all the new functionality and new patterns. So we are consistent with other controller runtime based projects in the Kubernetes ecosystem, and also take the benefit of bug fixes and new features, et cetera. So we need to, it's funny to say that we need to modernize the repo when it's not even a year old. The Kubernetes ecosystem moves quickly, so we don't want to get left behind. But Muvafiq, I met with Muvafiq last night to sync up on this, and then I think I'm planning on syncing up with him again after this meeting sometime. But basically, he's got it written out here, kind of a overview of what some of the major changes are. There's a couple different patterns in KubeBuilder v2, but one of the ones that might make sense for us to simplify some things is to have our CRDs will still be at runtime in a nested hierarchy where they have groups that sort of identify their functional areas, like database.crossplane.io or cache.crossplane.io. But in terms of the types being defined, like a types.go file, that'll be more of a flat list by version. So it makes even more sense when we with the next step of this migration, where we plan to move each cloud provider's specific types and controllers into their own specific repos. There where you'll have your types, et cetera, defined in kind of a flat list, but you'll be in a cloud provider specific repository already. So that makes plenty of sense. And by doing this, we can remove our need to have a fork of the controller runtime, the controller tools project, where we've been maintaining this fork that allowed a nested hierarchy and all this for our API files. And so if we remove that necessity currently and move to a more flat list, then we'll be able to not have the maintenance burden of that fork, but more easily keep up to date with upstream controller tools. A couple of other things are mentioned in Muvafiq's write-up, and I think Dan already provided some feedback as well. So I think this is something to keep an eye on, and we want to move this quickly because this is a prerequisite before being able to move the cloud provider specific functionality out into their own repos. So this is a bit of a bottleneck and a bit of a blocker. So with Optics working on this as his primary focus, and I am helping him with this as well. But if we see any other opportunities for parallelization or making this a priority to review and converge on, that's definitely my recommendation, that we treat this as a high priority, because it's a prerequisite for a lot of other things. So that's pull request 665 if anybody wants to take more look at it. All right, and Dan, you have a pull request 643. Do you want to speak through that a second here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've mentioned this before, and it was kind of brought up. I think it was even last community meeting, we talked about it briefly, just the movement to strongly typed resource classes. So we have already implemented the features needed to be able to basically implement strongly typed resource classes and default to them for every managed kind. So this PR is basically implementing just for a single managed kind. So GCP Cloud Memory Store was chosen. And this is kind of an interesting looking pull request here. So I'll try to explain it a little bit. Essentially what it does is it goes through every change that took place in this pull request and like the logical process for it. And then the legend down there at the bottom explains essentially what the tag means on it. So if it's a 1, that means that this is just something that had to happen for us to be able to do strongly typed resource classes at all anywhere. And if this PR was merged, then it would never have to be done again, and we'd be good on that. 2 means that this is something that has to happen every time a new abstract kind strongly typed resource class is added. So here we're doing GCP Cloud Memory Store. So that would be the abstract class that would, or the abstract kind that would consume that would be a claim kind. So every time a new abstract kind gets added. So for instance, if we had to, or if we were implementing strongly typed resource classes for replication groups or the Azure Redis managed kind, we wouldn't have to do any of the things specified with a 2 here. But if we were to implement strongly typed resource classes for, GCP Cloud SQL or whatever, then we would need to do 2 for the MySQL, for instance, abstract kind. And then 3 is something that has to happen every time a managed kind at all is updated. So if we were updating AWS replication groups or Azure Redis, we would have to do all of those steps for each of those. So it's kind of meant to lay out a path for implementing this across the board. And it's generally a very similar pattern. The only things that I would point out is that right now we have some helper functions, because with the generic resource class, we do not have strongly typed fields, obviously. So it's just like a map of parameters that has to be parsed. So right now, the claim reconciler usually calls some sort of, get specs from resource class or something of that nature for each managed kind. And it just parses the map of parameters. So those things can be eliminated now, and we can just set the spec directly because it's a one-to-one with the strongly typed resource class and the managed resource kind. So that's when a little more kind of like discretion comes in, a little more actual functional code changes happen. So you'll see in this one, I think there was a one function that did that kind of thing. And it's just been removed in the claim reconciler configurator. Just sets the spec for the managed resource kind to the strongly typed resource class kind. So yeah, this would be something that we'd want to converge on before implementation across the board.
Cool, that sounds good, Daniel. Thank you for describing that for us. I like the pattern that we've had recently for some of the more complicated pull requests. We have been in the description of the pull request adding, a particular, like a summarization of the functionality included here, particularly around some of the more difficult parts to understand or some of the parts that we want more verification or feedback on. So I like that pattern here where we're, in English prose here, kind of describing what what the pull request is, so that a reviewer of the pull request doesn't have to grok all that from just reading the code. So that's really useful to be able to have some supplementary information around that. Obviously, for big features and stuff, we'd want that in a design doc ahead of time. But this is I view this as supplemental to the to kind of help understand and parse the pull request for a reviewer. So this makes a lot of sense to me.
Definitely, and kind of in relation to MoveOffix PR is would obviously change how this is implemented. But the nice thing is we kind of have this pattern. So, basically just file names would be changing. So that could easily be updated if we went ahead and did the queue builder update first.
Yeah, and that's another thing to, good point that we need to take special note on, is that, as the queue builder 2 migration goes, we'll need to be cognizant of other changes in flight or impact to other changes, to be able to handle merge conflicts or, make sure that everything ends up converging smoothly. All right, so that was the last item that I had on the agenda for today. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up now that did not make it into the agenda doc ahead of time? All right. Then if there are no other topics to bring up for today, then we can go ahead and adjourn. And we'll see everybody on GitHub and on Slack, and then for each of the SIGs on YouTube now as well. All righty. Thank you for joining, everybody. We'll see you all online.